I said it before and I'll say it again. Life moves pretty fast. You don't stop and look around once in a while, you could miss it.
Welcome back to another episode of Don't Make Me Watch That. This week, I want to discuss teen angst, teen rebellion, teenage horror icons. What decade wins out for the most teen angst? We'll find out next.
Am I going in the right direction?
Before we begin, I want to remind you that if you love comics and pop culture as much as I do, you'll subscribe to my channel and ring the bell to stay informed of upcoming videos. Please share this video as that will help me gain subscribers as well. I also want to remind you to check out my columns and reviews on two sites, Comics for Sinners and Comic Crusaders. I also have my own franchises, Adolescent Radioactive Samurai Platypi and Carl Vincent Vampire Hunter. The latter has been picked up by Cutthroat Comics. Check the links below for more details and the link to Dracula Rising, which is available on Amazon. Here's some great artwork from Raphael Lanelhaus and the origin story Foul Blood. I also have a book which is a collection of my reviews and columns called Comics, Pop Culture, and Politics. You can also find t-shirts and posters on Teespring. Again, check the links below for all Carl Vincent Vampire Hunter merchandise. And now,
on with the show, this is it.
Being a teenager isn't easy.
I've got a trig midterm tomorrow and I'm being chased by Guido, the killer pimp.
Their bodies are changing.
Fred, she's gotten her boobies.
Oh, I'd better go get my magnifying glass.
Being bad feels pretty good.
They're growing up. They are the most misunderstood people on the planet. They're treated like children and expected to act like adults. Hell, John Hughes built an entire career out of hanging out at high schools. Will anyone ever take them seriously? With all the great teen movies that came out in the 80s, you'd think that that would be the greatest decade of teen angst. But if you look at what teenagers had to suffer through in the 1950s,
You're tearing me apart!
you'd realize that they had it much worse as teenagers were werewolves, Frankenstein monsters, from outer space. Hell, this guy would grow up to marry a witch and his mother-in-law would turn him into all sorts of strange things.
I don't mean to be disrespectful, but we want to live normal lives.
What is normal to you, young man, is to us asinine.
So this week, I want to look at some of the worst and best of genre films that featured teens. Let's start with the one that began it all. I Was a Teenage Werewolf. Now this film isn't as bad as the title would suggest. It's very watchable thanks to a great performance from Little Joe Cartwright himself, Michael Landon. Landon plays Michael Rivers.
Dr. Brennan, I know what I am. What I become.
Help me, doctor, please!
A troubled teen from Rockdale High who is hiding a big secret. Samuel Z. Arkoff wrote in his memoirs that he got a lot of resistance for producing a film portraying a teenager becoming a monster, an idea that had never been exploited in film before. The film became the first one to have the word teenage in the title. Dawn Richard, who plays a teenage gymnast in the film, was actually a 22-year-old Playboy centerfold model at the time, appearing in the magazine's May 1957 issue, which hit the newsstands a couple of months ahead of the movie. In addition to Michael Landon, Zorro and Lost in Space actor Guy Williams appears along with the guy who appears in every other film and TV show from the 50s and 60s, usually playing a doctor or a scientist, Whit Bissell. Michael Landon would go on to parody the role on his hit TV series Highway to Heaven in the episode I Was a Middle-Aged Werewolf. Jack Nicholson was turned down for the role of Michael Rivers for being the wrong type. He would play a lycanthrope in the film Wolf many years later. I gotta give this one 3 stars, simply because Michael Landon is awesome and took the role seriously. Also, the direction and pacing make it watchable as well. Also in the same vein, if you'll forgive the pun, is Blood of Dracula, which could have been titled I Was a Teenage Vampire. Directed by Herbert L. Strock and starring Sandra Harrison, Louis Lewis, and Gail Gainley, released by American International Pictures in November 1957. It is one of 2 follow-up films to AIP's box office hit, I Was a Teenage Werewolf. Upon its theatrical release, the United States Conference of Catholic Bishops described the film as a low-budget chiller in which a new student at a girls' prep school turns into a murderous vampire after falling under the hypnotic spell of the school's feminist science teacher. Stylized violence, hokey menace and sexual innuendo, and gave the film an adults-only rating. My rating is 1.5 stars for a couple of scenes that had a little bit of atmosphere. Otherwise, the plot is completely derivative of I Was a Teenage Werewolf, and Dracula isn't even in the movie. For its DVD release, DVD Verdict wrote, "Blood of Dracula has nothing to do with Dracula, but rather taints the vampire legend into the fate of a cranky teenage girl." The film basically takes the same route as I Was a Teenage Werewolf, but never lives up to that effort, especially with Harrison's monster turns kept to a bare minimum. But her wild bat makeup is memorable, looking closer to Nosferatu with big hair than anything else. And an impromptu musical number, Puppy Love, is kind of a hoot. This is the first American vampire film to show us fangs from the creature. So that's something, I guess. The film was released theatrically in 1957 on a double feature with I Was a Teenage Frankenstein, which is our next topic of discussion. I Was a Teenage Frankenstein is a film starring Whit Bissell, once again, Phyllis Coates, and Gary Conway, released by American International Pictures in November 1957 as a double feature with Blood of Dracula.
When the stitches are out, he'll pass for a normal, quite attractive teenager.
It is the follow-up to AIP's box office hit, I Was a Teenage Werewolf, released less than 5 months earlier. Both films later received a sequel in the fictional crossover How to Make a Monster, released in July 1958. The film stars Whit Bissell, Phyllis Coates, Robert Burton, Gary Conway, and George Lynn. The perennial mad scientist from the 1950s is back, and this time he's playing Dr. Frankenstein himself. Unlike Blood of Dracula, this one has a couple of actors genre fans may recognize. TV's original Lois Lane, Phyllis Cates, and Land of the Giants, Gary Lockwood. This one has poor production values and no buildup of suspense, again from director Herbert L. Strock. He ain't no Gene Fowler Jr., that's for sure. Ralph Thornton takes the same script and turns the main character into a Frankenstein monster instead of a werewolf or a vampire. 1 star for the actor's efforts. Now let's take a look at How to Make a Monster. Herbert L. Strock is back, unfortunately. Where the heck was Gene Fowler Jr. when we need him? This may be the first film where the crimes take place on a movie set where they're making a movie in that genre.
This maniacal strength will linger in your arms and hands. And with it, you'll destroy your real enemies. Exactly as I instructed.
The film is a follow-up to both I Was a Teenage Werewolf and I Was a Teenage Frankenstein. Like Teenage Frankenstein, a black and white film that switches to color in its final moments. How to Make a Monster was filmed in black and white, and only the last reel is in full color. Gary Conway reprises his role as the teen Frankenstein, but Michael Landon, who was probably making Bonanza at the time, did not return as the teen wolf. Instead, we get Gary Clark. Who? I don't know. 1.5 stars for the actors and the novel idea of having the action take place on a film set. Finally, from American International Pictures, here comes
Caveman!
No. This is Teenage Caveman. What? No, I Was a Teenage Caveman? Cavemen never looked so good. Hollywood models with modern haircuts, gorgeous bodies, and nowhere near as much hair as Neanderthals. The film has slightly better atmosphere and pacing thanks to the fact that they finally got rid of Herbert L. Strock as Roger Corman takes over the directorial chores. The plot is actually engaging, which features a tribe of primitive humans living in a barren, rocky wasteland and struggling for survival despite a lush, plant-filled land on the other side of a nearby river. They refuse to cross the river because of a law that evolved from an ancient tale, warning of a god lurking there who brings death with a single touch. Robert Vaughn brings a sense of realism to his role as the symbol maker's teenage son, and the rest of the cast does an adequate job. And there's even a bit of a twist ending that I'll admit I didn't see coming. I enjoyed this film, 2.5 stars for the aforementioned reasons. Outside of American International Pictures, we find films like Teenagers from Outer Space. The film was produced, written, and directed by Tom Graff and stars David Love, Don Bender, Brian Grant, Harvey B. Dunn, Tom Graff, and King Moody. Teenagers from Outer Space was distributed theatrically by Warner Brothers. In the film, a young alien named Derek abandons his crew to search for a new life on Earth, while one of his crewmates is sent to find him while they attempt to eradicate human life in order to farm Earth with giant lobster-like livestock they call gargons.
The gargon, get back!
There it is, Derek! It was under the rock! Quick! Shoot it, Derek! Shoot it!
It won't work! Run! Go start the motor! Hurry!
But the interesting thing about the movie isn't what happened on screen. The filmmaker failed to see a return on his investment, and it drove him quite mad. He had a falling out with a friend and fellow investor, Brian Pearson. After that, he declared himself to be the second coming of Christ.
Welcome to heaven! I'm Jesus.
Jesus
Christ. I practically run this place.
Oh, for reals?
I mean, my dad owns it, but I'm kind of number one.
You're one of those.
Unable to find work, Graff moved to La Mesa, California, near San Diego. Tragically, he committed suicide by carbon monoxide poisoning in his garage on December 19, 1970, at the age of 41. And that was the brunt of teenage-themed horror films where teenagers are exploited by adults from the 1950s. A close second to the 1950s, however, would be the 1980s, which gave us not one, but two teen wolves. Michael Landon played a teen wolf in the 1950s, and another Michael, J. Fox, would star in the first Teen Wolf movie. Teen Wolf was filmed before Back to the Future, but not released until after the movie Back to the Future came out, thinking that the Spielberg Zemeckis film would be a huge hit, and that would lead to Michael J. Fox becoming a huge movie star as well as a TV star, and they were right. Teen Wolf was filmed for $1.2 million and made over $80 million in its theatrical release. Unlike Back to the Future, which was rated PG, this film was rated R and contained nudity and strong sexual suggestions. This reviewer believes that if they had gone for a PG rating, the box office would have done twice as much and younger people would have been allowed into the theater. This is a fun romp about a young man named Scott Howard who needs to learn to be himself and not worry about what others think. When he becomes the wolf, he has no limits and becomes a basketball star. As a human, he is only a mediocre player, but as the wolf, he finds he can date the most popular girl in school, played by Laurie Griffin, but he's crushed when he learns that she just wants to be with him to make her boyfriend jealous. Scott winds up dating his childhood friend Boof. Not as popular, but a nicer girl overall. It's no classic, but it's a nice coming-of-age film that's fun to watch. If it weren't for the R rating, it would be for the whole family. 3 stars from this reviewer. And this led to Teen Wolf 2. Michael J. Fox wouldn't do the sequel, so they hired another teen idol from a hit TV series, The Hogan Family, in actor Jason Bateman. The less said about this film, the better. Just to compare this scene with Michael J. Fox asking for a keg of beer, that's funny because he's trying to do something illegal, and the clerk has good reason to refuse the underage Scott from buying the product.
Give me a keg of beer.
The sequel tries for a similar laugh when Jason Bateman's character wants to change classes in college. No risk here. The teacher, for some reason, doesn't want to allow students to change classes.
Nobody ever changes their classes.
I'd like to change some classes.
But it's nothing illegal, and no real risk is involved, so the moment doesn't work anywhere near as well in the sequel as it did in the original. There was an animated series which lasted 20 episodes in 2 seasons, and a live-action series called Teen Wolf, but that show had very little to do with the movie series. Harold Howard tells Scott, "With great power comes an even greater responsibility," which is an expression usually associated with Spider-Man. Screenwriter Jeff Loeb is known to comic book fans as he also wrote for the Spider-Man comics. Also in the 80s, there was Full Moon High, which is a lesser-known film about a teen wolf.
You carry the curse of the pentagram.
I've always wanted to go to the Pentagon.
Pentagram, stupid.
Oh, what shape is that?
The mark of the wolf.
And long before the current zombie craze, 1987 gave us I Was a Teenage Zombie. Writing in the Zombie Movie Encyclopedia, academic Peter Dendel called it an irreverent amateur parody of high school romance films in the 16 Candles tradition. Dendel cited the film as one of the forebears of the zombie romantic comedy trend of the 80s and 90s. The soundtrack features many rising bands of the time, the Del Fuegos, the Violent Femmes, Los Lobos, the Smithereens, and others. Oh, the trials and tribulations of teenage life. Finding a date for the prom, graduating with high honors, joining the popular kids, and, of course, avoiding supernatural turns. What's a teen ghoul to do? They have to avoid Buffy and the Scooby Gang at all costs. I hope this little film has enlightened you as to what supernaturally infected teens have to go through. I want to remind you that if you love comics and pop culture as much as I do, you'll subscribe to my channel and ring the bell to stay informed of upcoming videos. Please share this video, as that will help me gain subscribers as well. I also want to remind you to check out my columns and reviews on two sites, Comics for Sinners and Comic Crusaders. I also have my own franchises, Adolescent Radioactive Samurai Platypi and Carl Vincent Vampire Hunter. The latter has been picked up by Cutthroat Comics. Check the links below for more details and the link to Dracula Rising, which is available on Amazon. Here's some great artwork from Raphael Lannelhaus from the origin story Foul Blood. Once again, available on Cutthroat Comics. See the links below. I also have a book which is a collection of my reviews and columns called Comics, Pop Culture, and Politics. You can also find t-shirts and posters on Teespring. Again, check the links below for all Carl Vincent Vampire Hunter merchandise. And until next time, this is Kevin Given saying, live long and prosper, may the force be with you, keep reading comics, and keep watching those pop culture icons.